May the words of my mouth and meditations of our hearts and our minds, our very spirits, may all of these be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, you just heard right there in Scripture, for a short while, after that first Easter, the disciples enjoyed what I could only describe as a perfect Jenga tower kind of life. Everything was in order. Everything was perfectly aligned. The whole community was united as one. One as it related in terms of the spiritual things, and one as it related also to material things. Everything they were, everything they had was for each other, for expanding God's ways of welcome and healing and love. But you heard before in the children's sermon that life is like a giant Jenga game. And so it is even for those first disciples. It wasn't long then, as if they were in a game of Jenga, that they reverted back from those perfect ways to the ways of taking and topping once again, taking for themselves, trying to best rather than bless one another. And one of the ways that they tried to best one another was to claim connection to a better, a greater disciple or subgroup of disciples. Paul writes, "It has been reported to me in the Corinthian church that there are quarrels among you, that each of you are saying, I belong to Paul, I belong to Apollos, I belong to Cephas, I belong to Christ." And then Paul asks, "But has Christ been divided? Was Paul crucified for you?" And then he answers his own question. He says, "No. No, Christ has not been divided, and neither should we be divided." And then he launches into his beautiful metaphor, which you've all heard before, that likens the community of disciples to the human body, with many parts, many members, but each of which are precious and valued and needed, although very different from one another. In fact, their very difference is precisely why they are important and why they are needed. Because if all were the eye, then where would the hearing be? Paul writes. Therefore, Paul implores us to take up a ministry, yes, in Corinth, but also in our day and time, to unite and reconnect the community, rather than to aggravate that which divides us. Paul urges us to remember the body together and to remember that we all need each other. That if one suffers, we all suffer together. But the truth is, too often we don't remember that. We don't. And in fact, sadly, just like those first disciples in Corinth, we're tempted to think that we would be better off if we were just alone. Or we begin to think that we are better or we deserve more than others. Such tempting thoughts as that, they lead us into what has become known as the 7 deadly sins. Temptation takes us to the 7 deadly sins. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the 7 deadly sins, so let me tell you what they are. From the least deadly to the most lethal. Here we go. Again, least to greatest. Lust, gluttony, avarice, apathy, which many say sloth, but apathy is closer to the meaning, anger, envy, and pride. The reason these are ranked so, culminating in envy and pride, is that each of the 7 represents an escalation of being fixated on the self. On the self. And that fixation in turn divides us more and more away from God and away from one another. We begin to separate ourselves from God and other. If only there was a way to remember Paul's words of wisdom and that metaphor of the body and Jesus' non-Jenga way. If only. And of course, there is, and you know I'm talking about the piñata. That ancient spiritual teaching device, the piñata, which is pictured on the cover of your bulletin. This came as a surprise to me. You never know what you're going to find once you start Googling things. Centuries ago, monks in Mexico created their version of the piñata. Now, the piñata started in China. It then went to Europe, Italy. Piñata is an Italian word. But it got its way to Mexico. And the traditional Mexican piñata, created by Mexican monks, is pictured on your bulletin. It has 7 points on it, each representing, yes, one of the 7 deadly sins. The piñata was a catechism tool to teach about religion. The bright colors of the piñata represent how exciting, how attractive temptation is in our life. The piñata player is blindfolded to represent the necessity of moving forward in life by faith alone. The player is turned around, rotated 3 times, representing the confusion and the disorientation that temptation creates in our life. It throws us off our path. The 3 revolutions represent the Trinity and the 3 years of Jesus' ministry. The stick represents the power of a virtuous life that can destroy temptation and a life of selfish sin. The candy inside represents the reward of faith, the very sweetness of heaven itself. If you want to remember those things, there's a little postcard in the back on the table that has the piñata and lists what each part of it represents, and it also has a recipe on the back for tres leches cake. We couldn't create candy on that piece of paper, so we just made a recipe for a kid. And lastly, what the piñata teaches us, if you have ever been lucky enough or not to be the person that actually breaks the piñata, you know that when the piñata finally breaks, the entire community gets to taste the sweetness, not just one person. When you overcome all of these things by your virtuous life, it blesses everybody there and others. And in fact, sometimes the person who breaks the piñata gets the least amount of candy. Why? Because, of course, they're blindfolded. And they're still confused as to where they are. They get a late start over all the others. But as we know, as our faith teaches us, the hero of faith, those that model the servant like Christ himself, willingly make that sacrifice. That is part of the virtuous life. So today, Cinco de Mayo, we give thanks. We give thanks for this community, for how your differing abilities and talents, incredibly important God-given gifts are to us as a community. You all are worthy and valuable and precious. And yes, on Cinco de Mayo, we give thanks to remember the gifts of Mexico, its people, and its culture. Many of you are here today. May we also remember what Paul and the piñata teach. The non-Jenga Jesus way. Not the way of taking and topping, not the way of dividing and diminishing, not the way of besting, but the way of blessing, the way of service and sacrifice. For that is the way that leads to God and the sweetness of life. Amen. Amen.